name again is Christianne Beasley. I'm delighted to be with you this evening. Thank you again so much for Women Who Code Boston for the invitation. We're going to learn more about knowledge management, people, process, and technology, and seek out a definition together. And for our agenda tonight, we're going to have a really quick intro. Again, that was already lovely presented by Jordana. And I'm going to give you an industry look at KM 101 of what knowledge management is and what it looks like in the tech industry. And then we'll dive into what success looks like in knowledge management for both and for all of the above pillars, the technology, the process, and the people. And we'll end with some recommended resources, and I'll save lots of time at the end for questions and answers, but feel free to pepper along throughout and as we go if you have any questions on what I'm discussing or any clarifying questions that you'd like to ask. So as we dive in together, really wanted to wish you all a warm welcome. I'd be remiss and a very bad Getty Images employee if I didn't mention that all of the imagery that I've used in tonight's slide deck is from our Getty Images collections. You'll see a couple more images in a couple of minutes. And again, just feel free to be interactive, to ask any questions that you may have. But to kick things off, I wanted to give a quick intro, something that I love doing when I start different discussion sessions in communities of practice, which you'll learn more about in a couple of minutes, or in meetings at our company. We're a very visual focused company, obviously, is to give a quick bio or introduction via emoji. So if I had to choose 4 emoji of what my career looked like, those would be those ones at the top right-hand corner. As you mentioned, Jordana, I have had quite the interesting career, definitely not the typical tech industry career. I started as a librarian. I have my master's in library and information science. I worked in France and the United States developing and promoting collections, both print and digital in the Alliance Française network. Then I moved to Amazon, where I was a program manager in the Alexa program for France and Canada. That's where I met Anna by no mistake. And from there, I really wanted to meld together my love of libraries and my newfound tech skills and fell into knowledge management at tech companies. So first working at EasyCater, which is a catering company, then at Nexamp, which is a solar development and solar panel company, and now at Getty Images. So you may be saying, well, Christianne, what is the similarity between a catering company, a solar farm development company, and a stock imagery company? Well, the one thing that's really tried and true held up throughout my career is encouraging access to information and really connecting people with the information that they need to do their jobs. So whether it's at a catering company or a company facing new challenges in the solar development industry, that's been my tried and true resource. So a little bit about me as well outside of my role. I'm a supporter and co-founder of a number of women at ERGs at these companies. I'm a huge reader, and as Jordana mentioned, I have a senior pug who just turned 19 years old. So she keeps me plenty busy, in addition to all things fun and all things knowledge management at work. But enough about me. I know we're all super excited to learn about knowledge management tonight, and that may be a concept that might not be familiar to everyone. In fact, if you asked my family and friends what it is that I do for a job, they would be very hard pressed to tell you what it is that I do. It's a role and an industry and a field that is quite nebulous, as this image represents. And I actually have a colleague who every single time I meet with them, the first thing out of their mouth, no matter how many times I've met with them before, is your title, principal knowledge management is just so cool, but I have absolutely no idea what you do for a job. So let's try and figure that out together. Let's try and answer it. So the first interactive portion of our presentation tonight, I would love to know how you would define knowledge management. So feel free to answer in the chat, or you can annotate directly on the slide that's up at the top section and then clicking annotate. How would you define knowledge management? What does this nebulous concept mean to you? And also come off mute if you're not too shy. And I will pick on people, so we'll see who's going to be brave first. And what do you think knowledge management is?
I'm thinking about access to data and storage
Mhm.
of the data, the rules of the storage of the data, like the first two things that come to my mind.
Yep,
Probably
absolutely.
totally wrong.
Nope, nope. There's no wrong answer. Access to data, how information is stored, how it's categorized, and how someone's getting access to it. Absolutely. Jenny, what about you? What do you think about knowledge management?
So I am a knowledge manager as well. And of course, I think all knowledge managers have very different definitions. There's no single definition of knowledge management, but the one I usually use is the process of capturing, organizing, distributing, and effectively using knowledge and information.
Amazing. Perfect. Thank you so much. And she fell right into that trap. She knew I was going to call on her as a fellow knowledge manager. So many different ways to define knowledge management. And Anna, you're absolutely right. It's how we organize, how we capture, how we store information. Jenny, to your point, that general definition, right, that we refer to within our own field doesn't even really exist. But there are some signs that we can start to see where knowledge management could be helpful, could be effective for an organization. So feel free to raise your hand again, either on video or via Zoom, if you maybe have ever heard or said one of these things at work. I have to use X number of systems just to be able to do something simple. I can never seem to find information. I can't figure it out whether I stored it in Slack or an email or whether I heard it on all hands. I found information, but I can't trust that it's accurate. So I just went to ask my colleague anyway, or I turned to them in the break room and asked them a question. I haven't seen any hands raised yet, but I would gander that you probably have heard this somewhere along the way in your, thank you, Madison, for being brave, somewhere along the way in your daily work. And it's something actually that we hear very frequently as knowledge managers, as the people who are responsible for these programs. And really what knowledge management is it is here to help, right? It's here to develop a system and a strategy so that we can cut down on this type of feedback. These are really key indications that having a knowledge management program or some kind of process in place can be of a real benefit to an organization. These are in fact real things that I've heard from my colleagues, that I've heard from surveys that we've done, that I hear on a regular basis, where there is just that feeling of information overload or that overwhelm of the amount of information that you have to deal with on a daily basis, the systems that you jump in and out of just to be able to do one simple ticket or task or close something. It's a real thing, and it's why we're here, and it's why we try and solve for this. But if we look back, and we zoom out a lot at the actual industry of what knowledge management is, what this really nebulous concept and weird title looks like, as a practice, it really started actually relatively recently, really emerged in the 70s from a number of different academic domains, including business management and philosophy, information technology. That's why you'll see a lot of knowledge management roles sit within kind of an IT or an operations space. And in the 70s, actually, it was really popularized by a standard and practice in the US Army called after action reviews. So the four simple questions that they would ask of people coming back from a particular mission or particular adventure. What did we set out to do? What actually happened? Why did it happen? And what are we going to do next time? Which, if you work in the tech space, right, it sounds pretty similar to a retrospective, some of the questions that we might ask ourselves after maybe a bug happens or a feature doesn't go as we expected, or everything goes really well. What can we learn from what we've done? And we start to see knowledge management roles become more mainstream and come into play really within the 80s and the 90s. And what's really interesting is that even though I'm from a library and information science field, that's not at all where knowledge management started. And a lot of knowledge managers are not library and information science professionals. So a really nice kind of convergence of those two fields. And today, knowledge management roles are most frequently found in law practices or in governmental organizations. So it's really starting just to get kind of embraced by the tech industry, especially with a lot of remote work that's happened, obviously, within the past couple of years. That's been the case at Getty Images, where they went full remote and then realized and discovered that there was this need to be able to organize information so they could work at a global company and at a global scale, no matter who was online or where they were working from. So you will see more knowledge management roles, I would bet to gander, in tech companies in the next couple of years. And that's really how knowledge management started. But again, we're kind of evading the question of what is it? How are we going to define it? And what I find really interesting working for Getty Images for such a visual company is to look actually at how we define it within visuals, within some of our imagery. So these are pulled directly from gettyimages.com, our search strategy, searching knowledge management. And you'll start to see some trends along the way, right? That common definition looks kind of like people collaborating. It looks like some latest technologies. Maybe everyone's contributing to a conversation. There are some light bulbs. There are some brains happening, all sorts of fun kind of visuals, a lot of thought bubbles and magnifying glasses to represent search. There's some process documentation, whiteboards, just general collaboration, and of course, sticky notes. My desk is plastered in sticky notes, so we'll see a lot of those there. And you'll also see some networks, some Venn diagrams, right, representing what Anna said earlier, that data organization, how we're classifying things, how we're storing files and using cloud storage effectively. So we start to get some common themes, and then we start to look at the actual textbook, quote unquote, definitions that are what's out there. And as Jenny alluded to earlier, there's not even one definition of how knowledge managers define knowledge management, which leaves a lot of things up for grabs and up for opportunity for different companies to explore. So I bolded a couple of the things that really stand out to me in terms of how we can talk to knowledge management as knowledge managers. So it's really a little bit of all of the above, right? It's to help information and knowledge flow to and between the right people at the right time. It's about the process and culture and enabling technologies necessary to capture, manage, and share and find information. But it's also a range of approaches that are taken to enable organizations, and by virtue of that, their colleagues and your teams, to achieve success. So having access to information and the right knowledge at the right time can help people work most effectively together. And when I'm talking to that colleague, right, who says, wow, you have such a cool title, but I have no idea what it is that you do all day, the definition that I really frequently refer to is obviously to find and make it easier to find the right information at the right time. I don't want to hear that my colleagues across the company are spending hours trying to find the right answer. I want them to be able to use communication tools effectively and be able to collaborate asynchronously, and that they have access to information that's up to date and that we know who was the last person who vetted it and updated it. And the program that I'm responsible for, what we call Enterprise Knowledge Management at Getty Images, we tout it as a program implemented to formalize and standardize our information sharing standards. And that encompasses a number of different tools, and really that main and driving benefit being find the right information at the right time. But if we zoom out for just 1 second and say, okay, well, that sounds great and all, but I've never heard of knowledge management before, and I may not have a colleague in my company or a team in my company who works in knowledge management. Why is that? Well, it's frequently because knowledge managers kind of lurk in the shadows or do a lot of behind the scenes work. There may not be a role specifically dedicated to this at your company, but you may be in a position where you do some of this work, or where another team, maybe in operations, in HR, in internal communications, does similar kind of things. So we start to see knowledge management crop up in very different ways at different organizations. And really what is interesting is that if you do a search on LinkedIn today, a knowledge management role can look a myriad of different things and in different ways. You can have a strict title that is knowledge management or director of knowledge management like mine. You could have a knowledge-based manager, someone who manages external facing, so customer facing knowledge, or internal knowledge if you have a company wiki. You can be a subject matter expert, a technical writer, a similar title to mine, which was business librarian or digital librarian, all sorts of different things that start to really talk to the different breadth of opportunities for knowledge management to be implemented. It can be functional or team specific or enterprise-wide. It can treat internal or external, or maybe both facing information. And actually the function or team that it can sit in can really vary. So I've been in an engineering team, then I reported directly to a CTO, and now I report into our chief marketing and revenue officer. So it really varies and depends on the team and the organization and what the goals of that program look like. But across the board, again, as the titles may vary, the everyday work and the stuff that knowledge managers do really varies as well. So on any given day, I can be doing program management, I can be creating a training, maybe giving a presentation like this one to a group of colleagues, doing that typical like help desk support, right? I don't know how to use SharePoint and I deleted a ton of files and I need to get them back. It can be designing an intranet page, working on a strategy for change management and looking at, how we're designing our intranet effectively so that people can find information along the way. And even though no one day quite looks the same, really to simplify the definition, what we can drill out and take away from that is these three pillars that many of us refer to as people, process, and technology, the things and the core pieces of what knowledge management makes knowledge management successful. And really what we're looking at in terms of those aspects are how we're capturing the knowledge that we acquire over time, right? I'm coming into my role. How long does it take me to learn what I need to do? Or someone who's been there for 15 years, how long did it take them? And where are they storing any information that they've learned over time? What are the different processes across an organization to actually document something, to capture meeting notes or an announcement or something from the CEO, or even retro notes, things like that? Like, where is that information getting stored and how are we organizing it? And then what kind of tools are we using across the organization? Is it Slack? Is it email? Is it Confluence? Is it Google Drive? Is it all of the above? And how is information flowing to and from those tools? And where do information silos exist? So if we look at those three pillars, we can start to get a sense of, okay, there's a little bit of everything, but what specifically are we looking at in terms of success criteria, right? We heard at the beginning, I can't find anything. It's really difficult. I spend a lot of time searching for information. I'm just going to go straight to Anna because Anna is the source of truth and I never want to have to self-serve anything ever again. And when we start to look at those, we can see the flip side of that, which are what we want to hear, what we want to hear as a successful knowledge management program. We want to be able to hear our colleagues say, I know exactly where to go, or I know who to connect with to find information on given topic. I know where I can create and share information for my personal use, for my team's use, to share with the entire company. When I search, I can self-serve answers and it's not a laborious project or something that takes a lot of time. And most importantly, when I search, I can find things that are accurate. And I understand if I'm creating information for others, the importance of keeping that information up to date, and that I can trust the information that other people are feeding into that system. So we're getting there slowly but surely with Getty Images. We're about 1.5 years into our program. And we're starting to see, right, the trend starts from, I can't find anything ever, please never make me look again, search no, to I'm starting to trust search and I'm starting to try it and I'm starting to see the results of the work that you're doing. And that's really the most that we can hope for, and we'll continue to go up from there. And if you're looking to get started with knowledge management, right, maybe you come away from this presentation tonight and you're thinking, well, I'm not in a knowledge management role, but I'm starting to kind of get the juices flowing about how my team or how my organization could work with knowledge management. What are some of the things that you need to do? What are some of the things that I did when I first came into my role at a company that had never had a knowledge management program before, where knowledge management was brand new, where everyone said, I have no idea what you're going to be doing, but just go and fix it and come back when it's done. All of those things. The first thing to really start with is to understand your organizational goals and needs, right? What does success look like for knowledge management at Getty Images? What does it look like for success at Nexamp? What does it look like for success at Amazon, et cetera? You can go in and then do an assessment of where your information is stored and specifically why it's been stored there over time. Was it because Christianne came in and she just liked using this tool in the past and she started storing things there and everyone kind of followed suit? Was there a coordinated effort to bring a new tool and technology into the company and to really distribute it equally? Are there different information silos across those tools? And why are certain tools being used in certain ways and not? A lot of that psychology behind why we tend to keep certain types of information in certain places. And then you can, of course, refer back to the people, the process, and the technology. So you can start to look for challenges, start to look for those pain points for that feedback that you'll get of what kind of issues are people having with these tools? What kind of time are they spending looking for information? What kind of benefits can we expect this to bring? And specifically, probably the most difficult thing, how are people going to have to change what they've been doing and change how they approach their work to be able to get movement happening and to get progress moving forward? And that's why, as we start to deep dive into the people, the process, and technology, I actually invert it and flip it the other way in terms of easiest to most difficult, right? Usually we'd start with the people, but I actually, in my experience, have had some of the most challenging difficulty, change management issues with changing the actual culture of a company, with changing the way that people behave, the way that they store information, the way that they use tools. So to a room of tech professionals, it may surprise you that I'd actually choose technology changes as the easiest. We can debate that at the very end of this presentation, but we'll dive into this way, and I'll try and show you my way for a little bit. So if we're looking at technology, and here is just a smattering of all of the different systems that I have managed and used over the past 2 years of being at a role, we're looking really to, of course, continuously improve that user experience with those supporting communications tools. So whether your company is using the Google Suite or Microsoft or many different types of kind of customer information bases, a ServiceNow, a Zendesk, something that looks like a knowledge management system but might not actually be one, it's important to start kind of categorizing those systems and how those tools are being used, who manages them, how they're updated, what types of information are being stored in each. Of course, if you're drilling down and you're responsible for that strategy, you're going to start to look at how things are permissioned and controlled and what kind of data privacy or retention standards you need to consider, how long you're keeping information within an organization. And then specifically for information sharing, is there a knowledge base or a handbook or a company wiki or an intranet or a piece of paper that's posted in the break room in terms of how you do something and who's responsible for updating that? Where does that live, and how are people understanding how to do their jobs? And in the absence of those things, what's happening and what's going on? Which, if you have a brand new program and a brand new company, that's kind of the thing that I've been dealing with for the past 1.5 years, is trying to understand what's been happening and how we can make things better and where we need to prioritize our efforts. So of course, in talking through the technology and thinking through all of the different things that may appear and that may happen within that space, a knowledge management role or a knowledge management program could do a different smattering of things. It could be really looking at how information is organized. It could be reviewing search trends within a specific tool or across all of the tool suites that are out there. It could be actually implementing a taxonomy and a classification system and tagging for different types of resources. Could be designing intranet sites or cleaning up intranet sites and designing homepages for teams. And of course, trying to think about all of the new features and things that you might want to bring into anything. So for Getty Images, one of our key structures was to really try to understand how to get people to use search most effectively within the system that we use, which is SharePoint. And how we did that was to start a couple of different ways, but really at the basis to look at some of the frequently asked questions that we have, to add in some bookmarks and recommended resources, to add in a feedback system so that we're able to gauge whether or not that content that we're recommending is helpful, and to start to look at the navigational aspects of our different sites, of our intranet, so that we can understand how people are getting to specific pieces of information within that broader puzzle. And that simplifies it all in way too few words, but those are some of the aspects of how we'd approach technology, and how I partner actually with our technology teams very closely. And then as a second step, we start to look at the processes, at our process and how knowledge management refers to process across an organization. So some of the things that we're looking at, if we're looking to develop standards for how we're sharing information, how we're capturing knowledge, how we're formalizing guidelines of where, when, and how to document or share something within a team or company-wide, we're starting to consider who's responsible for doing that and when does it happen? What's the different strategies that we might have within different tools for saving or storing or naming information? And when are employees supposed to create different types of documentation? What's the standard for meeting notes? Is there a template? Do we send them out after? Do we send them out the day later? Is it via Slack? Is it via email? What does that look like? And how can we start to standardize that across the board? So if you're meeting with someone from marketing, sales, and product, you don't get 3 different types of interactions, and there's some kind of cohesiveness to that. And most importantly, and most critically, and something that I'm sure we can all relate to, is what are the processes for getting help within your role? And if you're someone who's on the receiving end of that, how are you handling the frequently asked questions that you get on maybe a regular or a daily basis, right? If I'm going to ask you the same question over and over again, times 50, times however many roles you have and functions across the organization, that's a significant amount of time that some teams may be spending answering the same question over and over again. So what can we do to start to compile those and standardize it and then automate those answers so that it's easier for someone to get the answer and it's less time, less laborious for those teams to answer those questions? So in Getty Images and our system and our practice and our project, process within knowledge management looks like publishing guidelines for how to document things and where to store information. It looks like information management or governance, right? How we're keeping things up to date, what our archival strategy is for information, different version histories. It looks like having that framework for understanding when to use email versus Slack Canvas versus OneNote, all of those different systems that we interact with. And then of course, as much as possible, using different automations, either something that's custom built or something as simple as a Slack bot, right? Having that custom list of per department, all of the frequently asked questions that are out there, so that we can at least start to cut down on the time that's spent answering questions over and over. And my personal favorite, something that I'm sure no matter what role you're in, you've seen time and time again, is the different versions and naming conventions that you might see when you're saving the last version of the file that's ever going to be that final draft final. She made some edits, then she went back and made another final edit. All of those things of how we're using those naming conventions impact and really influence how search works. It impacts and influence how someone is going to find that information, and most critically, how they know which is the most up to date, right? If there's an archive folder, if there's something called something different, if it's that date, how do I know which of these 3 files to go to for the most accurate and up to date information? One of those ways, obviously, is to look at the date, but if everything's called final, which one is it? Things like that, where we can work with teams across the organization to start to implement some naming structures so that it's easier to find and easier to update and maintain. And that final piece, last but not least, the most challenging and the most difficult. Think about all of the things that you've ever had to change within your workflow, within your processes. Some of those things you might be happy about, some of those things you might be less than happy about. But if we're looking at people and how knowledge management impacts what we do on a daily basis, if you're trying to capture both that explicit, so knowledge that's been written down, or tacit knowledge, things that you've acquired over time, over tenure, over your experience, and you're trying to foster a culture where someone's going to actually self-serve information and share information and contribute out. Some of the things that you might consider are who in your company are the subject matter experts on a given topic. You know that maybe someone in another team is the technology lead for a certain project or a product, or this person's really great at doing this, or figuring out how to finagle a system in this way. How much of that knowledge have they actually written down? If I were to turn to you and say, you, I'm sure, are experts in many, many different things in your roles. If you were to not come to work tomorrow, how would someone else know how to do that same exact thing? And it's natural and normal for us all to say, Oh, gee, there's a lot of things that I know how to do. And it's a natural human inclination to want to keep that knowledge around and to want to kind of keep it, close guarded. And not necessarily to always document everything out, but it's finding that balance within a knowledge management program of what is the information that is really key, really critical to making those business decisions, where if Anna were to change roles tomorrow, we would be able to have longevity and to have someone pick up what she's doing, so that we can all continue to work together. So we don't have that churn or those stop gaps that are in place. What are the different communities of practice or communities that are in place at your company, for people to be able to share that information and that knowledge informally? And more generally, how are they encouraged to share their learnings, to learn, to develop? And how does your company handle change management? So all of these things kind of contribute into really looking at enabling people within a knowledge management strategy. So it's that learning, it's that development component, it's the sharing of knowledge, but also receiving of knowledge. Goes both ways. And that could be a couple of different things. It could be most simply and most critically and importantly, aligning your knowledge management strategy or your program to your company's goals and principles. So at Getty Images, we have a set of leadership principles, tenets that we all work on together. And number 7, the one that I've highlighted, the one that I drive home true and true, is we are one Getty Images with no silos. So that means in any team, in any part of the organization, no matter what tools we're using, there is that collaboration, that continuity, the understanding that there are no information silos and no silos between teams. So what can we do as a process to share our learnings together and to collaborate most effectively? What is a knowledge management program or a strategy can we do to create trainings to better enable people to understand how to use Slack or SharePoint or OneNote? How are they kind of coming to that learning approach and understanding what it is that we do? How are we rewarding them also for contributing into that system or creating documentation? Everyone loves a badge, right? I want to be able to show on my Slack profile that I've done X number of trainings, or that I'm an expert in something, or that I've contributed into the company culture in some way. And it can be as simple as take a training in our learning management system and get a badge that you can show to your colleagues, to your manager, to the broader community that you've contributed in that way. And maybe it's someone who's really, really engaged and who wants to go above and beyond and develop a community of practice, what we call a COP, in knowledge management, to really kind of get together with people who are interested in a similar role, a similar topic. We have one at Getty Images called a Project Managers Guild for people who are in project or program management adjacent roles, but who aren't necessarily doing that work, but they want to be able to gain that knowledge and acquire new skill sets and kind of bounce ideas off of each other. Well, it takes time and it takes energy. And of course, it takes that knowledge to be able to elaborate those conversations and get people to share, comfortable to share their information and knowledge. So what does that look like? And what frameworks are out there that you can reference to as well? What is in that culture that allows you to share that information? So I'll get off my soapbox of those 3 pillars of knowledge management, and we're going to close things down and I'll open the room up for discussion. But really, as a takeaway and to foster our discussion tonight, I'll leave you with a few questions that you can kind of mull over and let yourselves think about, so that you can come away from this being knowledge management champions to your organizations and to your teams. So if you were to come away from this and you're thinking tomorrow morning as you have your coffee, take some of these questions and really dive into them. What tools do you use daily at work? What do you do if you can't find the information that you need to do your job? How much time, in total minutes and total hours, hopefully not in days, but how much time do you really spend on a daily basis looking for information? There's an industry standard, but with a report that was published by McKinsey from about 10 years ago, that says that people spend upwards of 1.8 hours per day. So not even an hour a week, just per day, looking for information. When you start to do that mental math really quickly, it starts to get very weighty in terms of time spent just searching for information to do your jobs. What can you do to make that more efficient? What standards or best practices might already exist in your team to keep information up to date? And more broadly, how can your organization, how could your team benefit from knowledge management practices, from all of those things that I just showed you? So if you're interested in continuing your deep dive, would highly recommend some of these recommended resources. We'll make sure that we get these links available to everyone. Lots of great resources out there online in the community of practice as well for knowledge managers. There's a great podcast by a company called Enterprise Knowledge, where they do deep dives and interviews with knowledge managers at different types of organizations all over. There are some books and some resources really to dive into in terms of getting that interest out there. And of course, if you're looking for any imagery, would highly recommend looking at the Getty Images collections. We do have a pretty wonderful, diverse set of images out there. So I will open it up to Q&A, and I'm going to just thank you all again for your time tonight and for your engagement as well. Any questions?
With you saying that technology is the easiest for you in the route of what's going on, can you hear me? I just want to make sure that
Yeah, I can hear you, Madison. Yeah.
Where do you feel like when you don't really have control over that situation because you're being placed into a spot where they're like, this is the system you use, good luck. And then they just kind of dip out and they're like, let's go. And you try to highlight, but what happened with our company is we did a change management from one system to another system. And when they lost control, they kind of didn't super love it. And there are people that adore it and people that hate it. And so I'm trying to figure out about how to like merge technology and people and just make them happier. But
yeah,
it's really hard.
Yeah, definitely. And Madison, you're absolutely right when you talk through like what happens if I actually can't control at all that change, the budget, the decision, the contract that we're locked into for 50 years to come, and we're stuck with it. So the ways that I typically approach that, and to be very frank with you, that's been the case at my current company and at all of the previous companies that I've worked with as well. Sometimes there isn't always that option to choose the ideal system, and sometimes the ideal system simply doesn't exist. So what I try to do and how I try and approach that, of course, is at least trying to get a sense from that get-go of why the system itself is not working the way that we would expect it to. And what is it in that interaction, in that user experience, that people are just not able to find information about XYZ. And then if you kind of start to compile those, you'll hear some common themes and threads over those experiences. And you can start to look at really critically and analytically, well, what is it that we can actually do and change and tweak and modify and develop in terms of the tool itself? And then what is it that we can do on the flip side for training? And maybe it is a training and engagement component where there hasn't ever been any standards put in place. There haven't been training materials. Everyone's kind of Googled their own solution or learned from each other, where someone can really act as that subject matter expert to put forward trainings out there so that you can at least start to change that culture of I hate system to at least I know the training is out there and I can at least get better enabled on it. And then if you still hate system at the end of the day, there is some kind of reference point to making it as most efficient as possible. So those are the two things that I would recommend, is looking at it from the what can I modify and what can I gather. You can always make feature recommendations, bug reports, et cetera, back to that company and let them know that you're really not having a good experience with it. What can you develop internally that will change it? And then specifically, what in terms of training or enablement opportunities are there? And how can you connect as well with other folks who might be using that product to kind of debug or brainstorm opportunities to get around those?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
Our Centella has a question. She says, any recommendations on tools to use for personal knowledge management?
Personal knowledge management, absolutely. So in terms of, I would ask you to define maybe a little bit further personal knowledge management. Is that the things that you've learned within your role, or that you're learning within your job? Is it something that you maybe have learned within a class or some kind of academic environment? How would you define personal knowledge management?
All the above.
All of the above. Fantastic. So like, how am I backing up my brain, right, to be able to keep easy reference to it so I can go back and do something. So
Right.
Jenny recommended a fantastic book in the comments too, The Building a Second Brain. That has some great reference points there. I personally really love picking a kind of personal project management type software for use. So I use Notion personally, and keep kind of that wiki environment to be able to go back and take notes on things and merge together all of the things that I've learned, books I've read, things that I've liked about something. But try to choose one type of system and think about the different learnings that you'd like to be able to gather in there. And then just start, and you'll see over time what works well for you and what doesn't. But those are things that I would recommend.
Okay, thank you. What was the tool that you said? Notion?
I like Notion. Yep, exactly. Yeah. And there are others as well. If that one doesn't work for you, Trello is great for kind of personal task management, can also be used for just kind of general to-dos. But something that merges together, really an option to kind of document and learn, an option to keep track of things, and an option to have that date stamp and be able to send pieces of information to and from.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So welcome.
I have a question. So mine is a bit silly, but with the whole generative AI going on out there in the world, have you seen any use of it in the knowledge management space so far?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I think we can all probably say that in some way, shape, or form, our all of our jobs and all of our industries have been impacted, or if they haven't, not yet. But that will certainly come. So the way the knowledge management industry, and I see there's Kristen's on the call as well, Jenny's on the call, who work in knowledge management. The way that I would kind of describe it is a lot of those knowledge management systems that we're starting to see and or that have existed for a long time are just really starting to release AI driven capacities. So whether it's an opportunity to actually capture information and translate it into a wiki page, for example, to augment a search reality or a search requirement set, to bring and merge together different search environments across a couple of different tools. I think we're just at the cusp of how the technologies are going to start to be used. And over the next couple of months, we'll start to see likely a lot of integrations within those systems. And of course, there's always the question of how are we using it personally, right? To actually document things, to create documentation. How are we using that at work within our systems as appropriate and as determined? So a lot of opportunity to explore, but I think we're still kind of at the cusp of it in the field for now. That's my personal opinion on it. Great question.
Thank you.
Any other questions that I can handle?
I actually have a question.
Sure.
When you choose technology, could you share a bit more? What criteria do you use? Are there ways maybe to gauge, I don't know, the performance, the stability of any pieces of technology of software, or is it mostly limited to some contractual obligations for enterprise? Any other factors?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of all of the above. There is, what we determine in terms of and that's been in all of the roles that I've been in, the knowledge management roles. So what we as a company, what kind of tool sets we're working with, what stacks we're working with, how those are going to interact with each other, and what it would look like to bring something new into that system. And it could be, and probably most importantly, is anything around retention and data privacy. What are the standards, SOX compliance, et cetera, that we can look at in terms of that vetting, engaging. But perhaps most importantly, in terms of that user experience, what does that search environment actually look like? What is going to be the day-to-day interaction, and how much control and flexibility do we have over really developing that system? Is it something that has, an open API, or something that we can add into, something that we are simply going to be making feature requests on? How much flexibility will we be given? Understanding, of course, that, the experience that we'll have with a certain tool or system won't be the same. And so we want that kind of long-term growth option. So those are a couple of the things that I would consider. At Getty Images in particular, a lot of our tooling and our applications were kind of pre-selected, and we've been, using them for a long time. So for me in my role personally, and right now at least, it's a lot on that training and guidelines and trying to make things better. But who knows what happens in the future.
Gotcha. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Thanks.
Sure. Seeing, just scrolling back up through the chat responses, you guys all gave some fantastic examples of how to define knowledge management. I appreciate that. How to organize how-tos and data dictionaries, managing information internally and externally, various cohorts information, collection of methods, etc. So you are all at this point knowledge management experts. So I'm very excited to hear that coming off of today's discussion, and hope that it was an interesting one for you. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, I'd invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn to continue the conversation, ask away any questions that you might have as well in the future. If you're interested, Anna and I had talked about potentially doing a series on knowledge management. So there is an opportunity to explore that, to really deep dive into what we're doing at Getty Images, or into a particular type of knowledge management that you'd like to know more about. So stay tuned if you're interested there. And thank you again so much for your time, for your questions, your engagement, and for the invitation to present tonight.
Thank you so much, Christian. I think we should all give her a round of applause for her amazing talk. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Let's talk about, and a round of applause as well for Jordana doing the first volunteer intro and engagement tonight. You did a fantastic job.
Thank you.